Imagine such a city. It has a court where 500 judges decide your fate, and most of them have never read a single book. It has a square where an aristocrat and a tanner who spent the whole day knee-deep in urine have an equal voice. It has a statue of a goddess 12 meters tall, and inside her, tons of gold hidden away in case of war. It has a philosopher whom the whole city knows by face, whom the young adore and the older generation despises, and who is ultimately killed by the very city he spent his life celebrating. This is not the invention of a dystopian writer. This is not a metaphor. This is Athens, and all of it was happening simultaneously, in one city, in one generation. A generation that decided human beings are capable of governing themselves. We think we know this story. Democracy, the Parthenon, Socrates, Plato. Words so worn down they have nearly lost their weight. But if you stop and look carefully, this is one of the strangest and boldest adventures in the history of humanity. An adventure that almost worked. And to understand what it truly was, you need to start not with the Parthenon. You need to start with debt. But the experiment was still far off. At first, Athens looked familiar. A handful of aristocratic families held the land, the laws, and the priests in their hands. Most people had none of the three. If you could not repay a debt, you became the property of your creditor. Literally, you and your children could be sold beyond the borders of Attica. The city was ripening for an explosion. Then Solon appeared. We do not know what Solon looked like. No reliable portrait survives. But we know he was a merchant, a man who had seen different societies, different laws, different ways of organizing communal life. And we know that when Athens granted him extraordinary powers, the right to rewrite all the laws, he did something no one expected. He did not take power for himself. First came the seisaktheia, literally, the shaking off of burdens. Solon abolished all debts by which people could be sold into slavery. More than that, he bought back those who had already been sold abroad and brought them home. With whose money, one can only guess. The aristocrats naturally were furious. The poor were in euphoria. Solon, by his own account, stood like a boundary stone between two armies. Then he divided citizens into 4 classes, by property census, not by birth, by how much grain per year your land produced. The wealthiest could hold the highest offices. But even the poorest citizen gained the right to vote in the popular assembly, the ecclesia, and the right to sit on juries. This was a revolution. Quiet, legal, but genuine. Solon did not create democracy. He created the conditions under which democracy became possible. Then he did what made him legendary. He left. He voluntarily went into exile for 10 years so that no one could pressure him into changing the laws. I gave you not the best laws, he is said to have remarked, but the best ones you were capable of accepting. Pause for a moment. Solon had just done something almost no one in history has done voluntarily. Received unlimited power and handed it back. How many people like that do you know? After Solon came the tyrants, Pisistratos and his sons, and here is yet another paradox, a tyranny that helped democracy. Pisistratos did not abolish Solon's laws, he simply ignored them, preserving the form while gutting the content. But during his rule, Athens grew wealthy, built a fleet, and began minting coins bearing Athena's owl, the very image still printed on the Greek euro cent. When his sons proved brutal and incompetent and were driven out, the city already had the resources and the anger to try something more radical. Cleisthenes, another aristocrat, another man of noble lineage who decided to bet not on his class, but on the people, carried out a reform that made Athens the world's first democracy in the full sense of the word. He broke apart the old tribal structures, the very ones that gave aristocrats their base of support, and created 10 new phylae, artificial electoral districts that mixed urban dwellers, farmers, and coastal people into a single community. Now your identity was defined not by your clan, but by your demos, your local community. Hence, democracy, the power of the demos. But the true golden age was Pericles. And to understand Pericles, you must understand what he was risking. He was born into the Alcmaeonid family, the very same noble house from which Cleisthenes had come, an aristocrat to the bone. But he chose a strange path. Instead of relying on aristocratic networks, he decided to build his base of support from those who previously had no voice, from poor citizens, sailors, craftsmen. He introduced pay for jury members. Now even a person who could not afford to miss a day's work could participate in justice. This sounds minor. It is not minor. It meant that democracy had ceased to be a privilege of those who could afford to practice it. The aristocrats despised Pericles. They called him a demagogue, literally one who speaks to the people. They mocked his elongated head and said he looked like an onion. His closest friend, Phidias, the sculptor entrusted with the rebuilding of the Acropolis, was arrested on charges of stealing gold meant for the statue of Athena. Pericles' companion Aspasia, an intelligent, educated woman from Miletus who ran her own intellectual salon, was put on trial for impiety, and Pericles, according to the accounts, wept in court, pleading for her acquittal. And in the midst of all this, trials, intrigues, imprisoned friends, and a ridiculed head, Pericles builds. Not because the moment is convenient, but because he understands cities do not live by laws alone. They live by images of themselves. You are admitted to the construction site, and you see something difficult to describe, even for those who have witnessed it 1,000 times. On the hill above the city, no longer the ruins the Persians destroyed 30 years ago. Something new is rising there. Marble from Mount Pentelicon, almost pure white, with a faint golden tint that emerges in sunlight. Every day, hundreds of workers haul blocks up a ramp. Among them, slaves. Among them, free craftsmen from across Greece, paid a day's wage, regardless of status. The paradox is already here, in the construction dust. A monument to democracy is being built by the hands of people whom democracy does not consider people. Phidias oversees everything. He is not merely a sculptor, he is what we would today call the project's chief artist. The 40-meter Parthenon with its 46 columns, each tilted slightly inward, so that if extended, they would meet at a point several kilometers above the ground. A building that appears straight but is not straight. A building that accounts for the optical illusions of the human eye and corrects them through tie-and-nie deviations from perfect angles. Architecture that manipulates reality in the service of beauty, and does so invisibly, like a skilled orator. And inside, Athena Parthenos, 12 meters tall, a wooden core sheathed in plates of ivory for the skin and gold for the clothing, shield, and helmet. The gold alone weighed roughly 1,200 kilograms. The plates could be removed and melted into coins in the event of military necessity. The goddess as a gold reserve. The spiritual and the material fused into one with no trace of shame. But while the city constructs its symbol of greatness, it already carries its own contradiction within. Who is a citizen of Athens? A free man, born of an Athenian father and an Athenian mother. Not slaves, who made up 30 to 40% of the city's population. Not women. Not metics, foreigners who paid taxes, served in the fleet, built the Parthenon, but had no right to vote. Pericles knew about this contradiction. He himself had passed the law that restricted citizenship, making it even stricter than before. He did not resolve the contradiction, he lived inside it. Sparta and Athens, the two poles of the Greek world, finally collided in the Peloponnesian War. This was not merely a war between cities, it was a clash of two models: oligarchy against democracy, land against sea, discipline against freedom. Pericles had a plan. Do not fight the Spartans on land, where they are invincible, but wait behind the walls, sustain themselves through maritime trade, and win by exhaustion. The plague undid the plan. The following year, the disease entered Athens, with the refugees from Attica sheltering behind the walls from the Spartan army. No one knows for certain what it was. Typhus, Ebola, some vanished illness. We know that within a few years it killed between 1/4 and 1/3 of the city's population. We know that Pericles lost both sons from his first marriage. We know that he himself died from it not long after the epidemic began. The city went on fighting for another 26 years after Pericles' death, and lost. Athens capitulated, the long walls connecting the city to the harbor the symbol of its maritime power, were torn down to the music of flutes, while crowds looked on. Democracy was abolished, an oligarchy was installed, the 30 tyrants. The terror lasted 8 months, then democracy was restored. But these were no longer the same people who had built the Parthenon. These were people who had survived defeat, plague, occupation, and fear. And it was they who would soon put Socrates on trial. Imagine living in this city after all of that. You watched the long walls burn. You survived the plague. You lived through 8 months under the 30 tyrants. And now democracy has returned. But you are no longer the same man who once rejoiced in it. You have grown more cautious, more suspicious. And there on the agora stands a barefoot old eccentric, asking whether you truly know what justice is. Socrates wrote not a single word. Everything we know of him comes through Plato, Xenophon, Aristophanes. That is, through people who loved or loathed him, but in no case were neutral. This means the real Socrates is forever out of reach. And perhaps that is exactly what he intended. He went barefoot even in winter. He did not cut his hair and, by most accounts, rarely bathed. He fought bravely, 2 campaigns, and fellow soldiers recalled how he stood in the snow deep in thought while everyone else froze. At home, a quarrelsome wife named Xanthippe, 3 sons, and almost no income. He spent his days on the agora and talked, with everyone, with politicians and craftsmen, with poets and generals. And he asked them all the same question. You say you know what justice is, explain it to me. The Socratic method, the elenchus, or cross-examination, was devastating. He would take a person who considered themselves wise and, gently, then logically, then relentlessly, show them that they did not understand their own convictions. He liked to compare himself to a midwife. He did not place ideas in people's heads. He helped them give birth to their own thoughts. And it often turned out there was nothing inside. It was uncomfortable. It was humiliating. Many people hated him for it. Aristophanes portrayed him in the Comedy Clouds as a charlatan who taught young men how to deceive their fathers and evade their debts. The play was a success, but Socrates, characteristically, did not seem offended. According to the accounts, he even stood up in the theatre so that the audience could compare the actor's mask with the original. Socrates is now 70. 3 citizens bring charges against him. Meletus, a poet. Anytus, a merchant. Lycon, an orator. The charges: impiety, failure to honor the city's gods and introduction of new ones, and corruption of the youth. The jury: 501 judges, chosen by lot. Standard procedure, democratic procedure. Socrates could have declined the trial and gone into voluntary exile. It was an accepted option. Many had done so. He refused. Why? Plato offers an answer through the words of Socrates himself in the Apology. He cannot stop doing philosophy. Even if the city orders him to be silent, he cannot, because he believes that an unexamined life is not worth living. At trial, he spoke in his characteristic manner, not defending himself, but asking questions. He even offered a jest regarding punishment, that instead of execution, the city ought to award him free meals at the Prytaneum, as it did for Olympic victors. The jurors, who had initially voted for guilt by a slim margin, voted in the second ballot, on the form of punishment, for death by a far larger majority. Perhaps he had offended them. Perhaps they chose to make an example. We do not know. He spent 30 days in prison while the sacred ship returned from Delos, during which time executions were forbidden. Friends bribed the guards. The doors were open. Socrates stayed. In the dialogue Crito, Plato shows his reasoning. He had spent his entire life in Athens, had accepted all the benefits the city offered, and now could not reject the law when the law turned against him. That would mean he had believed in the law only when it was convenient, and he did not believe in such selective loyalty. He drank the hemlock himself, surrounded by his students. While everyone wept, he, according to Plato's account, remained calm. He spoke of the immortality of the soul. He asked that a rooster be sacrificed to Asclepius, the god of healing, as payment for being cured of the sickness called life. Whether he truly said this, we cannot know, but the words came from Plato's pen, and they became immortal. What did Athens leave us? Not a perfect model, but a living paradox. A city where freedom of speech was born and where a man was killed for his words. A city where equality of citizens was invented and where half the population had no rights whatsoever. A city that could simultaneously love Socrates and condemn him to death. Perhaps that is exactly why this legacy remains alive. Not because Athens was ideal, but because it was real. And the questions it raised: who belongs to the people? Is there a limit to free speech? Whom does the state serve? These questions have no Athenian answers. They have only ours, the ones we give today, and yet they tried. Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. The Athenians knew this better than anyone, and they did not give up. You walk out of the Acropolis. The sun is already low, the marble has turned to gold. And somewhere below, the city, alive with its ordinary noise, entirely unaware that it stands on the site of the boldest and most dangerous experiment in human history. There is only one question: have we learned anything from it?